That Wednesday morning in November, when I drove through the first snowfall of the season to get to St. Joseph's Health Centre in Toronto, I thought I was doing the hardest thing a mother could do. I thought I was letting go. Have you ever stood in a hospital corridor, holding a pen, your hand shaking, while everyone around you smiled and nodded and told you this was the right thing, that this was mercy? I have, and I almost believed them. My daughter had been in the ICU for 11 days. Her name is Sylvie, my youngest, 34 years old, a kindergarten teacher who still called me every Sunday morning. She'd collapsed at school on a Tuesday. Aneurysm, they said, severe, the kind that changes everything. Her husband Derek, they'd been married 4 years, had been at the hospital every single day, attentive, grieving, bringing me coffee in paper cups, squeezing my hand in the hallway. I thought he was heartbroken. I thought we were heartbroken together. By the 11th day, the neurosurgeon had called us into a small beige room with chairs that were too soft and a box of tissues on the table like they knew. He explained, carefully, gently, that Sylvie's brain activity had not improved, that the likelihood of meaningful recovery was, and I remember this word exactly, negligible. He talked about quality of life. He talked about what Sylvie would have wanted. He used phrases like comfort measures and allowing nature to take its course. Derek sat across from me and nodded slowly, like a man carrying a great weight with great dignity. He said, "She wouldn't want to live like this. You know that. We both know that." And I, God help me, I almost agreed. Because what did I know? I'm 63 years old. I worked 30 years as a school librarian in Mississauga. I don't understand brain scans. I don't understand intracranial pressure. I understand Sylvie. I understand that she was afraid of the dark until she was 12, that she cried at commercials for dog food, that she kept every birthday card I ever gave her in a shoebox under her bed. The papers arrived the next morning. Derek had already spoken to the patient care team. He had already apparently discussed the timeline. I was called in to co-sign because Sylvie, before all this, had named me in her personal directive as a secondary decision-maker, something about wanting her mother's voice in the room if anything ever happened. I remember her laughing when she'd told me about it. "Just a formality, Mum. Don't be morbid." I was sitting in the family lounge with the papers in my lap when she came in. She was young, maybe 26, 27, with her dark hair pulled back and her scrubs slightly wrinkled, like she'd been on shift for a long time. I'd seen her on the floor a few times. Quiet, competent, the kind of nurse who remembers your name without looking at her chart. She sat down across from me, not beside me, across so she could look at my face. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said quietly, carefully, like each word had been weighed, "I need to ask you something before you sign those." I looked up. "Have you spoken to anyone besides Dr. Arnott and your son-in-law about Sylvie's condition?" I said no. I said the social worker had stopped by once. I said my son had called from Edmonton but couldn't get a flight until Friday. She glanced at the door. Then she leaned forward slightly and she said, "Please don't sign those today. I know that's not my place. I know it may not even be appropriate for me to say this to you, but please, not today." I asked her why. She said, "Because something doesn't feel right to me, and I've been a nurse long enough to trust that feeling." Her name was Priya. She'd been at St. Joseph's for 3 years, ICU and neurology. She had, she told me later, almost talked herself out of saying anything at all. She'd gone over it in her mind for 2 days. She'd told herself it wasn't her business. She'd told herself she was probably wrong. She almost convinced herself. But she hadn't been able to sleep. She asked me to wait. Not forever, just 48 hours. She said she wanted to show me something and that she would have it together by the next morning. She said if I looked at what she had and decided she was wrong, she would accept that. She would never bring it up again. I said yes. I don't know entirely why. Something in her face, maybe, or maybe it was the fact that my hand had been shaking too hard to hold the pen anyway. I called Derek and told him I needed another day. I said I wasn't sleeping, that I needed to process. He was patient, concerned, perfectly, smoothly patient. That night, I sat in Sylvie's room and held her hand. The machines breathed for her in their steady, mechanical rhythm. Her face was still. I talked to her the way I used to talk to her when she was small and had a fever, quietly, about nothing much. About the snow outside the window. About the way the light looked coming through the blinds. About how her aunt had called from Kelowna and sent love. I told her I wasn't going anywhere. The next morning, Priya met me in a consultation room on the 3rd floor, one of the small ones used for family meetings, not for official proceedings. She had her phone and a folder of printed pages. She closed the door and sat down. She told me she had noticed something in Sylvie's chart that had troubled her from the beginning. Sylvie's GCS scores, the neurological assessments, had fluctuated in a way that was inconsistent with a purely static presentation. There had been 2 instances, both logged at night by Priya herself, where Sylvie had shown subtle motor responses to pain stimuli. These responses had not been mentioned to the family. When Priya had flagged them to the attending physician, not Dr. Tam, not but the overnight resident, she had been told they were likely reflex activity, not meaningful. Maybe. That was possible. Priya knew that, but she had started to pay closer attention. She had noticed that Derek visited Sylvie every evening between 8 and 9, always alone, always after the shift change when the floor was at its quietest. She'd noticed it because she'd been covering extra shifts that week and had seen him each time. Nurses notice rhythms. It's part of what they do. One evening, passing by the room, she'd paused. Through the small window in the door she had seen Derek standing at Sylvie's bedside. He wasn't holding her hand. He wasn't speaking to her. He was standing over her with his phone in his hand, and he appeared to be photographing her face, the monitors, the equipment. She hadn't known what to make of it. People grieved in strange ways. She told herself that. But then she'd done something that she admitted, in that small room, she wasn't entirely sure was proper. She had looked up Sylvie's insurance documentation, not the details but the basic beneficiary notation that sometimes appeared in the system when coverage had been coordinated with the hospital's billing department. In Canada, patient financial information is kept largely separate from clinical records. But in cases of long-term acute care, there can be cross-referencing for provincial billing and supplemental insurance coordination. What she found was a reference to a substantial life insurance policy. The payout figure wasn't listed, but the policy tier indicated it was significant. She'd also, she told me, spoken to a colleague, a nurse who worked evenings and who had mentioned offhandedly a conversation she'd overheard in the stairwell between Derek and a woman Priya didn't recognise. Not on hospital grounds, in the stairwell of the parking structure attached to the building. The colleague hadn't thought much of it at the time. The woman had been crying. Derek had said something like, "It won't be much longer, I promise you." Priya had put it together slowly. She hadn't wanted to put it together at all. She had then done one more thing. She had looked up Derek's name, not in any official capacity, just as anyone might, and found that 2 years before he and Sylvie married, Derek had been named in a civil suit in British Columbia. A former business partner had alleged financial misconduct. The suit had been settled out of court. It was a matter of public record, buried in the kind of place most people never look. I sat in that chair and I felt the floor shift. I want to be honest about what happened inside me in that moment, because I think it matters. It wasn't the kind of sudden cold clarity you see in films, where everything snaps into focus and the hero knows exactly what to do. It was messier than that. There was grief, fresh, horrible grief. Because I had liked Derek, I had been glad Sylvie had found someone. I had thought he made her happy. There was shame too, because I had almost signed those papers. I had almost signed those papers. I had almost done it. And underneath all of it there was fury, quiet and specific and very, very cold. I asked Priya what she thought I should do. She said, "I think you need to speak to the patient advocate here at the hospital. I think you need to call your own legal counsel, separate from any lawyer Derek may have consulted. And I think you need to request an independent neurological assessment, a second opinion from outside this hospital's network. You have the right to all of those things. Sylvie's personal directive named you as a co-decision maker. That means your consent matters. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." She paused. Then she said, "I could be wrong about all of this. I want you to know that. I could be reading something into a situation that has a perfectly innocent explanation, but I couldn't let you sign those papers without telling you what I'd seen. I couldn't live with that." I called my son in Edmonton. He was on a flight within 4 hours. I called a lawyer, not the family lawyer who drafted Sylvie's will, because Derek had been present at those meetings, but a different one, a woman I found through the Law Society of Ontario's referral service. I told her everything in a phone call that lasted 40 minutes. She told me not to sign anything. She said she would contact the hospital's legal department directly. Derek called me twice that day. Both times I said I was exhausted, that I needed rest, that I would talk to him tomorrow. My voice was steady. I am 63 years old, and I have held myself together through things I will not name here, and I held myself together then. My son arrived Thursday evening. He had met Derek 6 times, maybe 7. He had never entirely trusted him, had said so once, carefully, more than a year ago, and I had told him he was being unfair. That conversation sat between us without either of us mentioning it. On Friday morning, the 3 of us, myself, my son, and our lawyer, met with the hospital's patient advocate and requested a formal clinical ethics consultation and an independent neurological assessment. We also formally withdrew the pending consent documentation. The attending physician, Dr. Pendy, Arnott, was present. He was professional, careful, somewhat, I thought, relieved. The independent neurologist arrived from Toronto Western the following Monday. She spent nearly 3 hours with Sylvie. She reviewed every scan, every clinical note, every logged response. Her assessment was different. Not dramatically, not miraculously. I need to be careful here, because this is real life, not a film, and real life doesn't always give you the moment you want. But she identified indicators in Sylvie's imaging that she believed had been interpreted too conservatively. There was, she said, a meaningful possibility of partial recovery, not certainty, but meaningful possibility. She recommended a different medication protocol and a trial of targeted stimulation therapy. She said the case warranted significantly more time before any end-of-life decisions were made. We authorized everything. In the meantime, our lawyer had been working. The life insurance policy, obtained through Derek's work, had Sylvie listed at $2.4 million. He had taken it out 18 months into their marriage, upgrading from a previous policy without telling Sylvie. Her sister-in-law, a woman I've known since Sylvie was in university, confirmed this. She had been growing uneasy for months and had not known how to tell me. The woman from the parking garage had been identified through the hospital's own security footage. The exterior cameras that covered the parking structure were monitored by hospital security, and when the police opened an inquiry, they were able to review the footage from the dates in question. She was Derek's former colleague from a real estate firm in Brampton. They had been together, according to her own later statement, for almost 2 years. Derek had also, the police discovered, been researching long-term care withdrawal procedures online. His search history, retrieved once the investigation had formal grounds, was specific and methodical in a way that suggested this had been a plan, not a response to a tragedy. He was arrested on a Thursday afternoon, 8 weeks after Sylvie had first been admitted. The charges included criminal fraud in relation to insurance documentation, conspiracy, and because of the altered medication log that investigators eventually uncovered, showing that someone had accessed Sylvie's IV line during one of those evening visits. Attempted murder. He has pleaded not guilty. The trial date is set for next spring. Sylvie is alive. She is not the way she was. I won't pretend otherwise, and I won't tell you this story has a bow on it. She spent 4 months in a rehabilitation facility in Oakville. She has some weakness on her left side. She gets headaches. Some days she is very tired, but she knows my name when I walk in the door. She laughed at something on the television last week. Really laughed the way she always did, with her whole face. She's coming home for Christmas. Priya was recognised by the hospital's Clinical Ethics Board. She received a formal commendation, though the way she tells it, she still wonders sometimes whether she handled it correctly, whether she overstepped, whether there was a better way. That's the kind of person she is, the kind who loses sleep over the question even after the answer turned out to be right. I have thought about what would have happened if she had stayed quiet, if she had talked herself out of it one more time, if I had signed those papers on that Wednesday morning with my shaking hand. I don't let myself think about it for too long. What I know is this. Someone in that hospital saw my daughter as a person worth fighting for, at a moment when I was too afraid and too grief-worn to fight properly myself. Someone trusted a feeling that had no proof behind it yet, and chose honesty over comfort. I have lived 63 years and I have learned many things, and most of them I learned too slowly. But I know now, more than I ever have, that when something in you says, wait, you ask the question, you make the call, you hold the pen a little longer. Sylvie called me last Sunday. We talked for almost an hour. She asked me about the snow and I told her it was bad this week. The highways were a mess. Her uncle had skidded off the 401 near Milton and scared us all half to death. She laughed. She said, Mum, only in our family. I held the phone to my ear and I didn't say anything for a moment. I just listened to her voice. That's all I needed in the end. Just a little more time to hear her voice again. I still think about that pen. The way I was holding it wrong, too tight, knuckles white, like some part of me already knew I shouldn't be signing anything at all. There's something I've come to believe, not because anyone told me, but because I lived it. The choices we make when we're most afraid are the ones that define us most completely. Derek made his choices from greed, from impatience, from a kind of moral emptiness I still find hard to fully comprehend. And those choices set everything into motion, not in some mystical sense, but in the plainest, most practical way. He left traces, he got sloppy, he underestimated a young nurse who happened to pay attention, and a mother who happened to listen. Priya could have stayed quiet. She told me herself she almost did, twice. But she had the kind of integrity that doesn't negotiate with convenience. She saw something wrong and she couldn't unknow it. That's not a small thing. Most of us, if we're honest, have had moments where we looked away because looking directly was going to cost us something. A job, a relationship, the comfort of not being involved. Priya looked directly anyway. She risked her professional standing, her reputation, the goodwill of colleagues and attending physicians for a woman she barely knew in a situation she couldn't yet prove. That took something, a kind of moral clarity that isn't taught in nursing school. It lives in a person, or it doesn't, and she had it. What I keep returning to is the thinking she did. She didn't panic. She didn't run to anyone with half-formed suspicions. She watched, she noted, she connected things carefully over days, the fluctuating scores, the late evening visits, the overheard conversation, the public records search that anyone could have done but nobody else had thought to do. She used her mind the way a good nurse uses her hands, precisely, without wasted movement. That kind of clear thinking, especially under the pressure of doubt and the fear of being wrong, is something I have enormous respect for. And then there's my son, who flew across the country on 4 hours' notice without asking me to justify myself. Who sat beside me and didn't say, "I told you so," once, not even with his eyes. That took its own kind of strength, the kind that shows up quietly, without needing to be acknowledged. As for me, I almost failed my daughter. That's something I carry and will keep carrying. But I also held the pen a little longer. I let a stranger's instinct matter to me when my own grief had made me too tired to trust my own. I don't know if that counts as courage exactly. Maybe it's just what love looks like when it's too exhausted to be anything else. Sylvie laughed on the phone last Sunday, full face, the way she always did. I think that's what all of it was for.